unenviable job of wrapping all this up together, so I'll try to be brief and to the point. Again, the focus that we're doing here is on the osteology and the radiology kind of evaluations. It's very important to point out our colleagues both internationally and nationally. Lars Van Schmitz is a colleague that's worked with us on several projects. He's going to be doing the DNA extraction. Our hope is that these elements are preserved enough that we'll be able to get viable DNA and we'll be able to do some tests, which I'll describe shortly. My other colleague, John Crickbaum, I'm so sorry he wasn't able to come with us today. He's down in Florida, but he is a born and raised New Haven. He studies bioisotopes because everything that you eat, the things that you consume, the vegetables you eat, the place you grow up, the soils have a certain elemental chemistry. And those chemistries become part of your bone and teeth development. And by looking at these patterns, we can tell a little bit more about how it is that this particular individual, where they came from, and what kinds of food resources they made. But, briefly, I want to wrap it up by trying to put this into the perspective of our inventory, our history, and everything else, and looking at some of the indicators of illness going on. For someone like myself, the thing that I'm most interested in is trying to figure out what's going on with the skeleton and tell them about diet, disease, labor, and medical care. So in other words, every set of bones may or may not have indicators of their lives, and we call this field paleopathology. The issue is, if you think about it, think of all the things that could possibly go wrong with you, and then how many of those will actually leave some kind of a bony indicator of a problem? If you break a bone, obviously that's something I'll be able to see relatively effectively. But if you have a fever or pneumonia or a skin infection, those won't be there. And that becomes a really difficult problem of doing this kind of research, of figuring out what you can and cannot say about bones. And it's really important for me to bring up that this entire investigation is very scientific. Not to make it sound like we're doing some awesome job with lab coats and things like that, but more about the fact that there's limits on what I can and cannot say, just based on the evidence that's present. Just as Jerry just pointed out briefly, when you are born and when you're developing, it takes energy. And all the energy that you get into your body has to be fed into select systems. Everybody in here, I hope, has a relatively large brain, at least hopefully larger than mine. And the goal is that you need to grow and get that brain functioning. Now, if you have resource depletion, if you have resource restrictions, if you have illnesses, your body shifts energy into different locations. And that's basically what Jerry was just talking about a minute ago, where you can see aspects of changes, where your skeletal system is one of the parts of your body that your own genetic and evolutionary history says we are not going to put energy into skull, tooth, and bone development, but instead into heart and brain development, because frankly, they're more important to getting you through your daily life. What we're seeing here is the indicators of life history and developmental arrest in several of the individuals that are present. The characteristic pattern that we see to show that there was some kind of an issue, again, nutritional meaning there wasn't enough food, or metabolic meaning that they were so sick that they were really reallocating energy, is you get these things called these linear enamel hyperplasia. And the patterns are that you just see that instead of having a nice, clean, smooth feature to the front or the sides of the tooth, instead you get kind of banding and all kinds of variation in structure. In looking at the variation in nutritional stress, the patterns that we see in all of these different teeth, what we're finding is that there seems to be roughly, for all individuals, including adult A, that about 3 to 4 years, they're all having some kind of problem. It's interesting to see how consistent it is across these individuals, as small a sample as it is. Now, my first thought was that this might be weaning stress, that when a kid is moving from nursing to eating, that's a big deal. But this age trend is too late. There's plenty of records for colonial moms and how they were doing weaning and when they were doing weaning, and it's pretty much a sharp stop at 2 years of age. So this pattern I'm seeing here, I cannot directly correlate to the historical record of colonial mother behavior. Individual A is showing some interesting problems that we're still trying to work out here. There are very few indicators on the skeleton of this adult male, the few elements that we have, that are telling you about a life with strenuous activity. If you are lifting weights, if you're throwing balls around all the time and things like that, your skeleton is going to show those muscular stresses. This individual, while reasonably robust, is actually a pretty clean-looking dude. There's almost nothing on the skeleton that jumps out as me as showing signs of severe physical labor. This can mean one of two things. Either he was too sick in his maturity to be able to do high labor issues, or Possibly, and again, these are hypotheses, maybe he was an individual that didn't have to do manual labor. Maybe his role in New Haven society was one where he was required to do less manual labor and more specialized labor. The issues that he's having are not acute, but more chronic enamel deficiencies. These lines that are not very visible here are just showing that he doesn't just have one line. He's got lots of enamel deficiencies going on with his teeth in his lower mandible, and he's also showing these multiple caries, the cavities that were shown in the radiograph. If you have cavities, the other thing I look for is periodontal disease and gingivitis, because just like I tell everybody I meet, including my kids, brush your teeth or one day you'll be my lab. Because if you don't brush your teeth, you get gingivitis, periodontal disease, any word tooth loss, abscessing, and death. So, brush your teeth. But the key factor is that this individual has all of these dental cavities, but very little indications of periodontal disease. That's interesting to me. This is suggesting that the enamel itself is actually very thin for this individual. Another component, the reason these lines are drawn, is that the limb lengths of this individual are relatively short relative to the body size observed. What does that mean? Well, in multiple populations, including forced labor populations in the Caribbean and medieval populations in Europe, we see that if individuals during their childhood are not getting enough food, the distal part of their forearms, this part of your arm, is relatively short relative to the rest of you, again, because the energy needs to be allocated to the appropriate locations. My current hypothesis for this individual is that this may indicate that what had happened to this person may have been signs of a stressful childhood. And again, remember, this is an individual that's about 25 to 30 years of age at the time of death. For individual E, we notice that bone, just like every other part of your body, reacts to health issues, and it can either deposit or remove bone. When we talk about periosteal and new bone, we're talking about the deposition of bone in relation to some kind of, usually, circulatory stress. And in individual E, the child that's very well represented postcranial, we see lots of indications of extra bone. This is how crazy people like I and Kylie are, is that we look at these, and instead of saying, oh, it's a bone, we're like, oh, look, there's all kinds of porosity there. That means something. It's very subtle, it's very small, but there is something going on there that is a health or disease indicator. The presence of a periosteal new bone growth in itself is not immediately diagnostic of something, but again, it is an indication that something was going on for this child at the time of death. And more importantly, you can often see these healing up once the stress is over, but these are all very active events, which suggest that they are going on at the time